Hello, Penn State fans. It's Wednesday of Wisconsin week, and that means it's time for another BWI Live edition. That's Thomas Frank Carr. I'm Greg Pickel. It's Wednesday, October 23. Penn State getting ready to go on the road to face the Badgers in Camp Randall in prime time. We're looking forward to it. We're going to talk a lot about that game today. We have a practice viewing window tonight. Some news to get to off the jump here for Penn State fans who remember back during the summer in preseason camp. Former defensive end Jameial Lyons and linebacker Kaveion were both briefly interim suspension from the program to handle what was called a personnel matter. About a week or so, I don't even know if a week went by, T. Frank. After that, Penn State confirmed that neither was still enrolled at the school. So that was back in early August, and then just on Tuesday, news broke that both are facing multiple charges in the Center County court system, including rape and other sex crime charges. So if you remember those guys both leaving the program back in the summer, that's certainly appears to be the reason why, T. Frank. James Franklin could be asked about that at practice tonight. He speaks afterwards. If he is, I don't think he will be. If he is, he's not going to have any comments, so that will not, there will be no more thoughts, I don't think, from James Franklin or Penn State Athletics on that. But in terms of what you could hear from James Franklin tonight as he gets ready to do his final news conference of Wisconsin week until after the game, of course, what do you want to hear from him this evening?
Yeah, I think the thing that I want to hear, and this is always in the conversation, another thing he doesn't want to talk about is injuries.
Right.
And as clunky as it is to that transition that I did after you did it so smoothly, it is the thing that I think is most important in this game of how healthy are they coming out of the bye week in a general sense. Specifically, obviously, James Franklin is not going to get into individual details, but did that bye week actually provide them the opportunity to get those key players back up to speed from a health perspective? And I'm thinking specifically of the run game, to foreshadow what we're talking about today on the show. I think that's going to be a big thing this week of how do you generate explosive plays and how do you bring balance to this offense to go up against a good Wisconsin defense. So health is very important for the offense and those explosive players on the offense run game side of things. So, that's the general idea I'm coming into this week with, is that's the most important thing. And then from that perspective of, did they fix what they wanted to in the bye week? Did they get their self-scouting now that they have 6 games? I think that's a larger sample size to say, hey, this is what we've done so far. Here are the tendencies that we've created. That do we break those without going away from what we're good at? And what are those things? Obviously, he's not going to get into the details, but assessing that conversation, I think, is also a worthwhile one heading into this final stretch where they've got 3 really important games back to back to back. A primetime game at Wisconsin is not an easy game, no matter who the team is. And then, of course, you've got the whiteout and Ohio State at home in November.
Yes, no doubt about it. So we'll see what James Franklin has to say again following that post-practice viewing window, or for the pre-interview practice viewing window, post-practice interview session with James Franklin and some players. Yeah, I think you're right. I think that it's important to note that during the bye week viewing window last week, we saw everyone we expected to see out on the field going through drills. So that was a positive sign. And certainly I'm sure there was a lot of rest and recovery time we, of course, were not privy to. But certainly I think that's a big question for Penn State coming out as you hit the two kind of on the head, nail on the head to me. First being, obviously, is Penn State feeling good about where it's at from a health perspective? And then the second one being, does it feel like from anything related to slow starts or just general tendencies, I think that was a good word you used, have they cleaned that stuff up? He's not going to tell us how they cleaned it up. Of course, that would defeat the purpose of not giving away any information. But certainly I think, we'll at least learn a little bit.
You can't clean it up and then show everyone what you've cleaned up.
Right. Correct. Yes, so no doubt about that.
Yeah, for sure.
So looking forward to that. Let's get into some more of the show here. Again, you will have full coverage of that over at bluewhiteillustrated.com as Penn State gets ready for Wisconsin with its final chance for us to get in and see them prior to them hitting the road. And speaking of one of the things we could see, it would be interesting to note if any of the freshmen are not in scout team uniforms. We talk about that every week here on the Wednesday BWI Live Show. So I'm not going to get into all that, T. Frank, but I do want to review the redshirt report with you at this point and update everyone on where things stand.
Yeah, I love the fact that we have you here on the Wednesday show because you have all the facts in order. You have all the details that escape me specifically. And so I love the fact that you're here to talk about this because I've not been tracking this. So this is for you to take and to go with. Where are we with some of the key freshmen in the redshirt status as we have gone through 6 games so far?
Yeah, I think there's two important things to note as you break that down. The first one being that, by and large, in my opinion, Penn State's plan really has not changed for how it wanted to handle the class of 2024 versus the way it's had to. You can make the argument, of course, that Luke Reynolds is a difference compared to the fact that Cooper Cousins and Lane were both guys who were going to play all year. James Franklin told us that, the offensive lineman and safety at Penn State, respectively. But Reynolds was not necessarily a part of that plan. He became a part of it, though, very quickly when Khalil Dinkins was not ready for the opener at West Virginia, so that put him into action in his first game as a Nittany Lion. And then, of course, with Andrew Rapplier suffering a long-term injury back in September, it elevated Reynolds to a point where he was high enough up the depth chart to burn his red shirt. So those 3 guys they've all played in all 6 games. Reynolds leads the way with 101 snaps on offense. And I found this number interesting, T-Frick. I didn't realize this, but 71 snaps on special teams. So we talked a lot last year, I think specifically with Tony Rojas about if you were going to play him, but maybe only get him, and Luke Reynolds has actually started the game, so his situation is not quite similar to Tony Rojas's from a year ago. But if you're going to use a guy, you're going to use him in all kinds of different ways, and they have found on offense and on special teams a lot of ways to use Luke Reynolds so far this year. So again, even though he was not put in that green light category out of the jump, I certainly think that he had to be more yellow-green than yellow, and we're starting to, we're seeing that due to the injuries and also just the way he can play and impact this team.
Yeah, and you'd love to have a 249-pound guy who can run, I don't know, in the 4.5, somewhere in there, to run down on special teams and provide you some of the cover you need in those situations. He's a great player to add into, a bunch of different phases of the game. I've been impressed with his, just generally talking about Luke Reynolds, I've been impressed with his run blocking for a guy who didn't do it in high school. And not necessarily, he did it a little bit here and there, but was primarily a wide receiver and a quarterback. That's where he's had to contribute the most, I think, because he hasn't gotten a lot of targets in these situations.
Right.
So providing just that your freshman season, that's pretty impressive. He's ahead of schedule, even if, we talk about he's been a good run blocker, for a freshman. That is still more than what I've seen from some guys. Like we talk about Tyler Warren as the most complete tight end in America. His freshman season, when we saw him the first time, I think his redshirt freshman season, he was not the run blocker he is today. So being that level of athlete that Luke Reynolds is, and being at this point in his career, like it's all very positive vibes for Luke Reynolds at this point.
Yeah, I don't think there's any doubt about that. And certainly the other 2 guys, as we mentioned, are making an impact in multiple ways as well. With Lane, of course, they're trying to get him up to speed faster, as we talked about almost ad nauseum. It's the Jalen Reed, the Lion conversation has almost become the receivers conversation, not obviously in terms of the quality of play, but just in terms of how much time we spend talking and writing about it. So those things are very similar in that regard. But if they can get Lane up to speed, certainly it would allow Tom Allen to call this defense the way he would like to. So those guys, again, no real question about them, T. Frank, as we look at the class of 2024 at the midway point of the season. But the next one is interesting, and there are questions here. And I'm curious to get your opinion on what you think Penn State will do in the second half of the season. With Nick Singleton banged up, Penn State used Quinton Martin Jr. in his second game, back during UCLA week. He made the trip, of course, to USC, and he has now played in 3 regular season games. And if you need a quick refresher, you can play in up to 4 regular season games. Once you play in a 5th regular season game, you lose a year of eligibility, but that counter stops cold in the postseason. So Penn State has one chance to use Martin Jr. again this year without using a year of eligibility, and if it uses him twice before the end of November, then he will use a year of eligibility. James Franklin basically said, I think what you would expect him to say yesterday, T. Frank, if they feel like he can help them win, either because of need, i.e. a guy being hurt, or because of what something, Andy Kotelnicki thinks he might be able to do with him, then you're going to see him out there. And if they can manage it and not use those 4 games, not go past the 4 games rather, and then use him however they want in the postseason, I think that's preferable. So where do you think they go with that? And are you buying what's been kind of hinted at, sometimes directly, sometimes not, that he and Corey Smith are kind of one guy, the other Penn State freshman running back, in terms of you can use them not interchangeably, but you can get them both on the field and have a third running back without potentially burning either guy's year of eligibility. I guess let's start with Martin Jr., how you think this plays out for him, and then where you think Corey Smith is. And they may tie together. You'll tell me.
I have a hard time seeing a path forward where Quinton Martin doesn't burn his red shirt, because I feel like in the final 6 games, however you want to phrase it, no holds barred, pull out all the stops, whatever you need to win a game, there may be a thing he does or a package that he can give you that helps you win a football game. Or, somebody gets dinged up, even if it's for a play in a very important game, you're going to go with the guy who can produce. And, nothing against Corey Smith. He's been here since June. He's not a Big Ten running back size at this point. Quinton Martin, 200 pounds at the very least, a guy who's going to be 220, but he's at least 200 pounds right now, and has shown that he can break tackles and he can be explosive. And James Franklin talked about there's things they can do with him that they aren't doing because they want to preserve his red shirt, and they want to focus the snaps and carries into Kaveion Allen and Nick Singleton. I guess I'm looking squarely at the game against Ohio State, and I have one question in my mind. Will they tighten up that rotation so it is just Nick Singleton and Kaveion Allen in that game?
Right.
Or will they say, Andy Kotelnicki, will he say, like, I want all the tools at my disposal to generate explosive plays, especially in the run game? And Quinton Martin is explosive. Like, that is one thing that we know about him. He's fast, he's explosive. And that to me is the deciding factor. Like in terms of, do they want to play him in that game? Do they want to save one for later? How does that work out? Because I think that they're going to need him at least one more time. Yeah. And then from there, if they get through these next 2 games, then I think that the path is a little bit easier to not burn his red shirt. I just have a hard time seeing that be the case where they don't need him at some point in the next 3 weeks.
Yeah, and I think there's 2 parts to this conversation. They could need him because, again, like you mentioned, a guy gets banged up, or Andy Kotelnicki, the mad scientist that he is, found some unique ways to use him during their bye week self-scout. Or I think we forget what's often behind door number 3, and maybe this is where Corey Smith could factor in, is the best availability, or the best trait most players can have is availability, and the easiest way, obviously, to not become available is by staying into a blowout too long. Now, you can obviously make an argument that there may not be too many blowouts left on this Penn State schedule, but in the event that they are, you don't want Kaveion Allen and Nick Singleton out there any longer than they have to be if a game is out of reach. But you have to have a running back out there, of course, in most instances, unless you're going to just go with, have Tyler Warren play 1,000 snaps.
I was going to say, you get into Tyler Holsworth pretty quickly at that point.
Right.
Like you're putting a veteran out there at the least, a guy who has Big Ten size. And I don't want to over accentuate that because Corey Smith brings a lot of other skills to the table, but it's just one thing that is kind of like obvious when you look at him, is he's just a little bit smaller from a frame perspective coming into he was that in high school, right? So that was a known quantity, and maybe that's why I'm over-exaggerating it, but I do think it does matter, because James Franklin said he's getting close, but that means he hasn't been there yet so far.
Yes, so we'll see how that all works out. I do buy the fact that Penn State will try its best to preserve a year of eligibility for Quinton Martin, and again, he has 3 games played so far, so 1 more regular season game, and then Penn State would be at the point to make a decision, or one way or the other. But I agree with you. I just think that it will be tough for Penn State, not impossible, but tough to keep him off the field for, twice more during the regular season. Only one other Penn State player is played in multiple games this year from the class of 2024. It's safety Vabo Torre, 28 snaps on defense, 1 on special teams. So I think, at this point, I would expect they try and get at least 1 more game for him, just because, again, of the safety depth situation. Mm-hmm. And so we'll have to wait and see on that. But I don't think he'll burn his red shirt unless somebody else gets hurt. But I think they'll try and get him some more game reps when possible. And then everyone else, T. Frank, is in the 1 or 0 category. And, would be very surprising if any of the guys on that list burn their red shirt.
Yeah, it would be a break glass in case of emergency. And in that situation, like, you're hoping it isn't Xavier Gilliam or Jalen Harvey or one of the defensive linemen, a situation that might crop up a couple guys that I think could get more games this year from a merit perspective, and because I think that they have the ability to do that, would be Antoine Belgrave Shorter or John Mitchell. Belgrave Shorter, they talked about him as a safety in those situations. I just have a hard time if you're going to move a freshman and expect him to contribute. Like they're having a hard enough time, and I mean this in terms of like just because it's a hard thing, not because they're struggling to do it, getting Dejon Lane up to speed. So you move Belgrave Shorter and he's got to get up to speed. I think that was kind of it was thrown out there as a possibility, something they were toying with, but I never took that as something that's definitely going to happen. Both of those guys, just from a corner perspective, there's a lot of them and they are playing well, but I could see, late in the season, some of those guys getting into the game. Kenny Wosley, another guy who I thought played well when he was in the game. But yeah, as you mentioned, 12 snaps on defense. They haven't had a lot of blowout situations this year.
Right.
But that's it to me. I mean, the obvious other ones are the ones you would think of in terms of Tyser Denmark and probably at that point, that's it.
Right. Yeah, I think so as well. I want to get to a few things from the chat, T. Frank. But first, I believe you have a message for our listeners, and thank you all for joining us, whether you're in the chat today or not.
Yeah, this is super awesome because I love when we have sponsors and we have things that align not just with Blue White Illustrated in terms of the quality of what we do and, what I think is a very professional level of performance, both on the site and here on the YouTube channel, but also things we believe in. And when I'm not here on YouTube, I am watching woodworking videos on YouTube. I love woodworking. I love, some of the process of the craft. And I'm super excited to tell you that our latest sponsor here on the Blue White Illustrated YouTube channel is Rothrock Wood Projects. It is a local woodworking company. And this is super cool, Greg. You can own a piece of State College because they source their trees from State College, whether it is trees brought down by natural causes, urban development, or municipal management programs where they have to take trees out of certain locations. They take those trees, State College trees that you probably grew up with if you lived here, or if you were a fan, you walking downtown, or you were in the neighborhoods and you just love a certain area, you love State College, you can own a piece of it because they create these heirloom pieces from wood that those beautiful trees have given them. You can see them here on the YouTube channel. I love this stuff. You can see the quality of the work, the quality of the projects they do. And because these are usually older, more mature trees, some that have been hit by disease, they can do the epoxy tables. If you know, epoxy tables are super popular, but it allows you to put color into your table, coffee table, bar, whatever it is. So if you're a Penn State fan, you can get a Penn State coffee table. You can get a Penn State dining table with that Penn State blue in it. And it is a piece of Penn State. It is a piece of State College. So they recently signed a contract with the State College Borough to procure those trees. And they're going to be able to produce a bunch of this stuff. So if you want to check them out, Rothrock Wood Project is the name. You can check them out. Scott is a great guy. I'm actually going over there later today on Wednesday to go to his shop. I'm so excited for this, to go and see his process and get you some video and show you how they do all these things, because the end products here, as you can see, are beautiful. So if you want to check them out, rothrockwoodproject.com. I'll make sure that we get the link in the description as well, and that we have that up here on the show so you can go directly to there. So appreciate them sponsoring the show. Greg, you're muted.
I was muted. You are correct. I didn't want to interrupt your ad read, and then I forgot to unmute myself. No, we're happy to have Rothrock with us. Thank you, and thank you to everyone listening and as always being a part of the show. A couple things, T. Frank, before we move into our next topic on the rundown from the chat. Yes, we are. All right, we already have some real feedback in the comment section about the awesome stuff Rothrock produces. That's cool. That didn't take long. I love it.
Yeah.
Please do check them out. Rothrockwoodproject.com. A couple things from the chat. We should have brought this up earlier. It's a good call. Keon Wylie noting, James Franklin noting last week that Keon Wylie, they're still hoping to get him back this year. So when we did the practice preview segment, that's something that I know everyone's interested in. I'm with you at that face you just made for not watching on YouTube. T. Frank made the face of, I think if you were putting it into words, it would be, if they get him back, great, but I would not get hopes up for.
It was a meh shrug emoji.
Right.
Yeah.
Go ahead. It's just a tough point of the season if you are trying to get back into the swing of things. Again, I think the best case you can hope for is like what happened with Zariah Fisher a couple years ago, where they were able to get him back on the practice field late in the season. He was able to do a little bit late in the year, but it was mostly just building back up for the following season. And I think that's probably the best case you can hope for there with Wylie. But we'll see what he's doing, if anything, today.
I think that there's two conversations. The first is the most important thing is the regular season. I don't think he's going to be materially affecting the regular season. And that's really where I would, in my brain, I leave the conversation, because anything that happens in the postseason, it's 100% derived from what happens over the next month. And is he going to be a part of that? I just don't think so, especially in the games where you want as much depth, talent, and have your roster be as bulletproof as possible. That's here now. Like that's right. This upcoming stretch. So yes. Is he going to be ready by the postseason where he could actually play meaningful snaps and contribute at a level that isn't just a token? Wow, how awesome is that? It's all like, we don't know the medical information. We've seen the fact that Zariah Fisher was on the field. I don't know that he was an impact player when he played okay, but he wasn't the player he could have been, in the player that we saw the next year, because being on the field doesn't mean you're back. The ability to come back from an injury from the full perspective, it's not just that cleared to play. It's how explosive are you? Where is your conditioning? All of those things. And they're going to make sure that that's as ready as it is as possible. But he's a smaller guy from a linebacker perspective who hasn't been able to do a lot of things this offseason to get bigger and stronger. So I just the whole process to me would be like, that's awesome. I don't know how much it's going to affect this year in a real way from that perspective.
Right. The only big difference, of course, between the past instances of guys coming back in this is that it's 2 months from today. The first round of the playoff would be 2 days old or a day old, depending on which day you play. But yeah, so there's not a whole lot of time left here. I know it seems like a lot of time, but it's not. And if you play late into the year, I know that everyone's going to look at the calendar and suggest that this, that, and the other thing. And then, it could help. You could also be out December 20th or 21st. Some teams, of course, will be, and that'll be that. So if Penn State's not going to be out in the first round or anytime before that, Frank, it's because of some of these guys we're going to cover next, looking at some advanced data and players on Penn State's roster, both on offense and I believe defense as well, that are playing at a high level beyond the regular box score numbers, beyond what most fans and media members and what have you might track on a day-by-day or week-by-week or game-by-game basis. So I want to start with the obvious, where we always start, whether it's for any number of reasons. But Drew Aller, the Penn State junior quarterback, second-year starter for Penn State, by and large, you would be very hard-pressed. I think it would be impossible to find anyone that would suggest that he is not playing better in 2024 than he did in 2023. We can all see that with our eyes, but what do the numbers tell you that qualify some of that, very good stuff we're seeing on the field?
Yeah, so this is, just so we're all on the same page, this is PFF data from PFF.com, their Premium Stats 2.0. Just going in and combing through some of those data perspectives from a passing perspective, it lines up with what we've seen. And that's always nice when the data shows you the same story that you are seeing from film evaluation. So the number one thing that pops out is his yards per attempt is 10.2 through 6 games. That is 6th among all quarterbacks this year. So he's chucking the ball down the field. They're getting chunks of yardage when they throw. And the most notable thing is, again, his willingness to throw the football into contested situations, into traffic, over the middle of the field. I think he's shown more athletic hubris so far this year, and that shows up in his big time throw rate, which is when you're talking about plays from a quarterback perspective that they're directly involved with making the defense wrong, winning through their timing and throwing down the field with accuracy. It was 2.9% of his throws last year were big time throws, those highest graded throws in the PFF system. This year it's 5.3, so almost double. And that's evident when you watch the film. And by the way, 5.3 is a healthy number. It is not near the top of the country, but for Aller and this offense that generates a lot of open windows for him, he's not having to do everything, but he has taken a step. And I think that's the biggest thing, is whether you watch the film and you want to evaluate it that way, you want to go into the data, it's all pointing in the same direction. Drew Aller is doing more difficult things better than he was able to do last year, which was take what the defense gave him and be safe with the football. The thing I was starting to say last year, and the thing that I think is really important, whenever you say take what the defense gives you, they're giving it to you for a reason. They don't want you to have something else. And at some point, you got to go take it. And they have been able to do that this year from a passing perspective with Drew.
Have you been impressed by so obviously Danny O'Brien's had a large role in this. Andy Kotelnicki's had a large role in this. Drew Aller himself, of course, has had a large role in this. Thinking back to August, T. Frank, as we thought about what Drew Aller could be this year in this offense versus what he is, do they align? Is he a little bit better? Or are there some areas you thought could be different that have shown up in ways you weren't expecting?
It's more that he was not maybe as consistent as I thought. So this offense, at least from a passing perspective, doesn't bite around the edges all that much. It wants to run the football, create big windows down the field, and then attack with the passing game downfield with those windows. When you run the ball and you're as committed to running the ball as this offense is, you can't then dink and dunk, because then your whole offense is within 10 yards of the field. So they need to stretch the field vertically with passing game, and they've done that. I guess the difference is at certain points this year, Aller wasn't as accurate in that 10 to 19 yard range, intermediate throws. He has improved that. And there's this conversation we had in about the middle of the season where I think it was the Illinois game. He came out and he looked a little bit like 2023 Drew. And then, of course, we saw what happened in the USC game where he completely turned it on and became, a game-winning quarterback. So it was more of the lack of consistency, but the turn he's made towards being the guy that needs to operate this offense the way it needs to be operated, because he has to throw those balls, or else this offense shrinks. And so that's the other thing is, kind of getting deeper into those intermediate throws, his completion percentage, his yards, all those things, which, by the way, I wrote about all this stuff at bluewhiteillustrated.com. You can check out the full article there. He's completing 58% of his deep passes. It was at 66%, which led all quarterbacks in the nation before the USC game, and it dropped dramatically to second place because he was a little more aggressive. They had to take more shots than they probably wanted to in that USC game to come back. But he's been super efficient with the ball down the field. I know we had this conversation about underthrowing some of these balls and not putting the ball directly perfectly in the basket. Either way, when they take shots, generally they're making it. And fifth nationally when he throws the ball down the field, 22.2 yards downfield. So when they throw the ball, they're throwing it far down the field, and he's making those attempts and converting them at a high rate. So he's operating the offense how he needs to, and has only gotten better since the beginning of the year.
Right. I know a lot of people, of course, point back to some of the decision-making against USC. And certainly I think Drew Aller would like to have 2 of those 3 interceptions back. I'm not going to hold the Hail Mary one against him. That's just, it's one of those things where you look at the box score sometimes and don't have all the context. And if you're looking at Drew Aller's stat line, you might say, wow, he had 3 interceptions in that game. But, I mean, it was really 2. So at any rate, next guy on the list.
And those were good plays. Yeah. Those were good plays by the USC defenders. And the way I characterized it in my film study is that that's the price of having a guy that is willing to throw, to his second progression quickly, because he's trying to anticipate where the window is. Sometimes the defense changes the picture, or they anticipate those things. So that's a trade-off to having a more aggressive Drew Aller. And I don't care. Keep chucking the ball, dude. Do not. That was my favorite part of that game, is he made those mistakes. I understood what happened when those were not boneheaded decisions of like, what in the world were you doing? When you look at what he saw pre-snap and what he saw post-snap, he got the picture he was expecting one time, but somebody made a good play. The second time, it was a different coverage than what he saw pre-snap. So they got him on one of these plays. That's fine, because he got them more throughout the game. And if you try to then say, like, you need to play perfect, which we talked about last year, like, I don't go backwards. Do not go backwards in that situation.
Nope, I 100% agree. But important to note too that the one interception, one of Drew Aller's two interceptions that were not on the Hail Mary play, it was the same play call that Penn State went back to for Nick Singleton's game-tying touchdown catch. And obviously,
Yep.
I don't know how USC left him so wide open, but you talk about USC getting one over basically on Drew Aller in a certain instance and causing a mistake. Well, Penn State did the reverse in one of the game's biggest moments, and certainly was trusted. Andy Kolnicki trusted him, and he trusted himself to make that play. Yep. Kevin, thank you for the super chat. Kevin Payne, good morning, boys. And chat, give me the aggression every time. Someone else says attack, attack, attack. Yeah, I agree. Assuming we're talking the aggressive Drew Aller, I think there's no doubt about that. And an aggressive offense. T. Frank, the next guy you have on your list here, and then I want to ask a broader question to you about the Penn State offense. But it should come as no surprise to anyone. Tyler Warren, in all facets of the game, is shining. And advanced data is one way. If you watch it, it's obvious. The regular box score, records, the award watch list, over and over and over again. But what is he doing that's impressing you beyond what we see from a 17-catch game or an updated record book, things like that?
To me, it's the consistency that he's shown as a receiver, where if you remember early in his career, he had some drop issues. There were some times where the ball clang off his hands. I don't want to say that he's over that, because every receiver can somehow get into a slump again, but he's been super consistent. When you target him, he's got, especially against zone, because Penn State has seen a lot of zone this year. He's 30 of 33 in terms of targets and receptions in zone coverage. That's phenomenal. And he's been, dangerous over the middle of the field. A lot of this is generated by that USC game. It did happen. You have this snapshot through 6 games that can change over the course of the regular season and reduce some of these numbers. But his consistency, Drew Aller's aggression, they are dominating the middle of the field with the intermediate routes, I should say, with Tyler Warren. His passer rating between 10 and 19 yards is a perfect NFL passer rating of 158.3 when you target Tyler Warren 10 to 19 yards down the field. That's when you have that level of efficiency at that point in the field, this is what the Kolnicki passing offense wants to be: explosive and efficient when you throw the football. I don't think Drew Aller is going to have the number of yards and pass attempts and touchdowns to win a Heisman, but he's going to be one of the most effective quarterbacks, and Tyler Warren is going to get a lot of those targets, as we've seen so far this season. So yeah, I'd say his consistency of just doing a game in and game out has been the best thing.
Any defensive guys standing out to you in the advanced metrics or data, T. Frank?
Yes, but I haven't been able to go through it and put it all together just yet. That's been something that's on my to-do list as far as going through those guys. It is not the same level of players standing out on a national level that the offense has some pretty singular players. And go check out the full article on offense, because we get into the run blocking, we get into some of the other players that we're not talking about here. But the offense has more of those individuals that stand out on that particular level, as opposed to the defense, which has some good players, but not necessarily standing out on that Big Ten or national stage.
If you want to read T. Frank's film studies and prospect evaluations, insider recruiting, and team news from Sean Fitz, Nate Bauer, Ryan Snyder, so on and so forth, join us today at bluewhiteillustrated.com, where you can use promo code PSU1 to get access to 2 months for $1 with promo code PSU1. Again, you'll get all the stuff T. Frank's talking about, from film analysis to game previews. Obviously, the recruiting is hot and heavy right now. We're getting ready to ramp up into basketball wrestling season 2, so there will never be a dearth of coverage at bluewhiteillustrated.com, where you can get 2 months of access for just $1 with promo code PSU1. One of the things we talked about, I did in the matchups post this over at bluewhiteillustrated.com this morning, and we've been kicking it around inside the premium Lyons Den message board this week, T. Frank, is 2 words that I have seen over and over and over again this week. Trap game. Is this a trap game for Penn State?
Mm-hmm.
Can Penn State avoid the trap game? And it's been asked and discussed in a number of other different ways as well. And I have a pretty strong opinion on this. And we'll have our predictions up on Thursday at bluewhiteillustrated.com. And I'll just give you a little sneak peek. Like, I am at the point now, about this game, or I am going to be either very right about how it plays out or incredibly wrong. I have left myself almost no gray area at this point. And we'll get into some of the reason why when we get into the full game preview a little bit later in the show. But this whole idea of a trap game for Penn State coming out of the bye and looking ahead to Ohio State, I just don't buy it. And I feel like if there was not a bye week last week, maybe I would be a little bit more willing to buy into the notion of it being a trap game or a look ahead spot or what have you. But I just don't, number one, think this Penn State team operates that way. It never has under James Franklin. Can you point to some times where maybe it was sloppier than expected ahead of I'm sure some people would probably maybe want to call the UCLA game a quote unquote trap game with the USC trip on deck. Not sure I'd buy that either, but I would maybe allow that conversation to play out a little bit. I don't see this game as a trap game at all. I see it as one Penn State knows it's going to a very challenging road environment. Prime time, where Wisconsin has historically been very good in prime time in Camp Randall, and it knows what's at stake, obviously. So I just am not buying the notion of this being a trap game. I'm sure that comments in the chaps are probably all fired up, but
so far everyone's agreeing with you.
That is a surprise.
Well, this is why I would say, Greg, we have a very smart audience, which is always awesome. That we have the chat kind of gets it. Here's the other thing. Wisconsin's 5-2. It's not like, I understand they lost to Alabama and they lost big to USC. They were competitive in both of those games. This is a team that has a winning record. You're going on the road in a primetime environment. All of the markers around trap game usually are that it's a bad opponent. And this is not a bad opponent. There are many ways we'll get into here in the preview in just a second of how this team stacks up, that they have something that can challenge Penn State probably to the highest level we've seen so far this year. So there's no, and this is the other thing, like Mech Engineer puts it up here, define trap game. Greg, I think you laid it out of like it's an opponent you overlook because there's another opponent on the schedule that takes more of your attention. I don't think you can overlook Wisconsin and from the brand to their play to all of these things the way that people have given it credit, the way you've talked about it, of what you've been dealing with. So I don't know. I agree with you. I generally don't think that that's a thing in the way that a lot of people think it is. I think fans are afforded the ability to think that way. I think we can talk about Ohio State. I know Friday I'm going to be watching Ohio State film to get ready for the game afterwards, but it's not the same thing. The other thing is, Greg, how much do analysts play into this now? The narrative of James Franklin, the staff, their preparedness coming out of bye weeks. You've just got more bodies to do recruiting and football and advanced prep at this point. Do you think that has a material affected the way that they can do some of these things they want to coming out of bye weeks?
Yeah, I don't think there's any question that they are, as most college football programs are now, further ahead than ever before when it comes to future scouting, future planning, recruiting, so on and so forth. Obviously, self-scouting from the first 6 games, so on and so forth. So, yeah, there's no doubt with the extra hands that are inside the building, and Ryan is just going to play right off of that with a super chat. Thank you, Ryan. Yeah. He says, I argue that finally having the larger staff, and of course that includes the analyst, allows for less idea of trap games. The staff is able to focus on this week while other staffers have been on OSU for weeks. That filters down to the team. Yeah, I completely agree, and I think that's what you're asking there, T. Frank. Ryan, thank you for the super chat donation. But yeah, the other thing about a trap game too, and the chat's kind of proving the point I wanted to make, but like if you think it's a trap game, you can define trap game in almost any way you want within reason to fit the narrative of what you think is going to happen. So I'm not saying anyone in the chat's doing that, but the question, it is one of those things where you can certainly make it out to be whatever you want it to be. And so I think that... Yeah,
is this a reverse 1-0 mentality play by fans who are worried about a letdown, that they're not going to allow in any way they can the team to forget that this is a game they have to win? Because this it feels like it's the same thing. James Franklin preaches 1-0, focus on the team this week, and everyone is saying, don't overlook Wisconsin, don't look ahead. Everyone's saying the same thing. It's just coming out in a different way, where one group is saying, like, you are looking ahead, and the other group is saying, we only ever look at the team on the schedule. It's funny to me how that's like a positive and a negative way of phrasing these things come out the exact same way. My grandparents used to yell at each other and argue all time, like for 10 minutes. And they were saying the exact same thing. And I would point that out to them, and then they would just keep arguing about it.
Yes, and that's sometimes what we have happen over on the board, in the chat, so on and so forth. We are being yelled at the moment. Best way to dismiss all the trap game chatter might be just in all capital letters, getting off to a good start for once. That's Eggman. I get it. I think the bigger issue to me, it's really not the quote unquote slow starts, which especially defensively, I think they're probably a little bit overstated. Offensively, I think you can probably make a fair point. The bigger issue to me is just the field goals in the red zone. Like at any point in the game, like that's a bigger problem to me than obviously Penn State's been great in the second half, and there's been not as great moments in the first half most of the time. So I get it. But to me, I want to see less field goals in the red zone and more touchdowns. I know they had one wiped off the board at USC, and there's you can argue until forever whether it was offensive pass interference or not. But the point being is, Penn State had first and goal at the 5, I think it was. Like I just am not. Yeah. I am not convinced it should have ever had to have come to a point where that play is causing a pass interference penalty that puts you in position for a field goal. So Penn State had first and goal at the USC 4. It went Singleton no gain, Aller for a yard, Aller 1 yard to Warren, that's the other thing that bothers me. And we're getting way too far afield here, but the other thing that bothers me is the number of plays this offense sometimes runs that are either short of the first down marker or short of the end zone. You're that close to it. But that's a tangent for another day. So, T. Frank, maybe it'll come up in the game preview. Maybe it will not. But I think we hit enough on the trap game to look ahead fully to what is not a trap game, if you ask me. And if you do feel like it is, I respect your opinion. I just completely disagree. So, Penn State, Wisconsin, set for primetime on NBC Saturday. We'll have complete coverage from Madison as the Lions look to move to 7-0. We're going to start our game conversation with the Penn State offense matching up with the Wisconsin defense. And you and I talked about this a little bit off the air, T. Frank, and we're going to get into some more nuance, but I'd like to start with just a more bigger picture question as you look at this defense. But if you look at its three most recent games as compared to its two you have to ask yourself, which defense is Penn State going to see? Is it the one that's holding mediocre to below average offenses to the 20-some points over the last 3 weeks? Or is it the one that got pretty well taken advantage of in the 2 losses to Alabama and USC? And how you answer that question, and whether you think Penn State could do what those 2 schools did to this Wisconsin defense, is going to go a long way in determining how you feel like the Penn State offense matches up in this game with the Wisconsin defense.
I need to pull up what I just had. I need the Wisconsin schedule, because the nature of those teams is pretty important. And how you're able to affect the offense. So Rutgers, Northwestern, what do those 2 teams have in common? They can't throw the football. They're not teams that have a dynamic passing attack. And Nebraska is the other team in there, right? I'm sorry, I'm going off of the top of my head, and I think that was part of the conversation. I know they lost to Indiana big this past weekend. So generally, Penn State's offense has more options and is more dynamic. This is a good defense from a discipline standpoint, from a coverage scheme, synergy, if you want to call it that standpoint, where everything kind of works together, but they are not supremely talented. One of the things, they don't have a pass rush. They don't have a, kind of a number 1 pass rusher. They don't have an aggregate of pass rushers. When I was doing some of this prep, before this past weekend, looking at their blitzing, they do a lot of simulated stuff where they're bringing guys off the ball, but they don't really have a fastball from that perspective. So if you are playing against a good offensive line that can pass protect like Penn State can, your coverage can only cover for so long. I think that's the strength of the defense, is the secondary. But if you hang them out to dry in man coverage and you let guys run around forever, Penn State has the athletes to get open. USC and Alabama won in single coverage. They won big on these big passing plays because they have good corners, but I don't know that they have elite corners. But that's going to be the question. To me, this is a game that is a show me game for the Penn State wide receivers. Have you developed to the point where you can beat man coverage and get open? Because we haven't seen a secondary that has this level of talent so far this season. I think this is the best overall unit that plays well together, has enough talent, and can do enough things to frustrate Penn State's passing attack. So that comes back to, not just Aller, but do the receivers get open? So to me, that's, kind of I've kind of gone all over the place, just kind of vomiting thoughts here, but that's where I start with in this matchup is, do they have the athletes to get open? Because Penn State should have all day to throw.
Right. And so that's one of the most fascinating, if you look at the stats overall, and again, we know that numbers can lie and they can tell you a misleading picture, but one of the things that is amazing to me, and some of this is due to who Wisconsin has faced the last 3 weeks, and also the fact that Alabama and USC didn't necessarily have to throw it as much late in those games. But here's what drives, this is interesting. Wisconsin has the number 7 pass defense in the country with 155.9 yards allowed per game. Why is that interesting? They're 112th in tackles for loss and 86th in sacks. So to your point about not generating, it defies logic almost that this Wisconsin pass defense could be so decent statistically, despite the fact that they are not doing all that well when it comes to getting to the passer, which is part of the reason, or just in the backfield period, they're 61st in rushing defense. So far this year, I believe Wisconsin has been facing, sorry, let me pull this up here. It's been average of 32 runs per game, T. Frank, versus an average of passing. Yeah, let me find this here. An average of, this is not good podcasting, I apologize, 26 passes per game. So teams are, at least so far, doing a little bit more running against this defense. But I look at it like this. I hate to just make it very simple, but I think what we saw against USC and Alabama, and Steven, thank you for the Super Chat donation. We appreciate it, and you always being here. He says, I feel much better about Aller in this game than in a previous year. I completely agree. And when you combine that with the fact that I just look at this Penn State offense and say, okay, if you think you are the number 3 team in the country, and not saying Penn State, but if Penn State is the number 3 team in the country, or if it just simply is a top, certainly 10 team and even top 5, this is a game where you take your offense on the road, your offense travels, and it puts up the points it's expected to against a beatable defense. So I think you hit the nail right on the head perfectly, is that they do have yes, I believe this is a Wisconsin fan chiming in. I don't disagree. They're very good secondary. I think T. Frank said it earlier. It's probably the best one Penn State has faced so far this year, and I'm not even sure there's a lot of room for argument in that comment. But I just think that if you take this offense on the road to Wisconsin, I know you're going to have some building issues with communication, crowd noise, things like that. But if you're going to go where you want to go and think, if you are a top 10, top 5 team, you got to play like it, and you got to be able to go out and score points. And it is a show me game for the offense, and especially the receivers. And I think they've shown me enough to buy into it. But at the same time, we're still at a point where the receivers are a bit of a question mark. Can you win in man coverage? Can you sit down into a zone? Can you make a guy miss if you do? Yeah. And I think those are the questions we're going to see need to be answered for Penn State this weekend.
So Salvatore says this, and I apologize for starting us off on the conversation about receivers and the passing, because I really think you're right. This is more about the run game, and that's where I started the show with, but we're here now, so I've dug myself this hole. I got to dig myself out of it. Wisconsin hasn't looked good against respectable offensive teams. That's exactly true, but does Penn State have a Ryan Williams or a Zachariah Branch or any of those USC receivers, which I know that team has lost, but those are some dangerous players. You see teams doing things sometimes even out of character to shut down that offense. The thing is, it works. You can shut down that offense because the offensive line is so bad. This particular team, this defense, did some good things against both of those offenses, at least early. But then they, when you live and die by man coverage, you live and die by man coverage. So sometimes those elite athletes beat you. Does Amari Evans get open and make a big play? Does Trey Wallace get open and make a big play? But to me, this is where we should start, is I don't think that this Wisconsin front is particularly great. Especially, I know they've got big guys on the interior, but some of those players, I'm thinking specifically of, one of the things I was doing when you were talking is looking up the name Kurt Neal, the 92, the defensive tackle. I see him get moved a lot on double teams. So despite him being big, you can move these defensive tackles around. 94 plays a little bit better, Elijah Hills. He's a little more mobile, But sometimes being big just means you're big and you don't have good balance. You don't have good power because you lose your pad level because you're stiff and you're upright and you're too heavy for your size. And I think there's a little bit of that going on with this Wisconsin defense. Now, their linebackers are pretty good in terms of, Jaheim Thomas is good against the run. I think they got some guys that can disrupt. They do have the size. But this is where it comes back to what I said about what I want to know at practice this week is Anthony Donko healthy? Is Nick Singleton healthy? Because if they are and they play up to that level that they were early in the season, I don't have any questions about this game. Penn State can run the ball. They can be explosive in the run game. And then suddenly that secondary and that defense is on its heels. You get whatever you want at that point because Penn State is good enough that they can manufacture those big plays even against a good secondary. But if it then is leaning on the passing game, that's a test for this offense that, USC was good. This secondary is probably a little bit better. And so can you win in when you have a disadvantage slightly, being on the road against a good passing attack? But if they can run the ball, it's immaterial. And I think they can if they're healthy. I don't think they can. I know they can if they're healthy.
Right. And that'll be a big talking point, obviously, throughout the rest of this week, and regardless, really, of what we see at practice tonight. But certainly it'll help inform the picture going into Wisconsin week. And I think so at this point, our thoughts are probably pretty clear on the Penn State offense against the Wisconsin defense and who has the edge. As always, it'll be about execution, and it'll be about limiting mistakes and so on and so forth. But if everything is as we expect it to be, it's an edge for Penn State, even going on the road. Let's flip it over to the defense, Frank, the Penn State defense against the Wisconsin offense. And to me, I think this is probably where Penn State has its biggest edge in this game. Is it a defense that has caught a bit of a reputation for some things you prefer not to see at times? Yeah. Is the Wisconsin offense putting up as good a numbers as it has all year over the last 3 weeks? Definitely the previous two. Last week was just okay, I thought, at Northwestern, but I'm sure Wisconsin fans probably thought that might be a trap game too, and it was not. Our Wisconsin fan that's in the chat, let us know your thoughts on that. But I see a Wisconsin offense, Frank, that is probably going to try and get the ball out quick, but it's just really hard for me to get worked up in a positive way about this offense, even with the work it's been doing, when you know that it's starting quarterback Tyler Van Dyke has obviously been out for a while, out for the year. And Ches Malusi, that's fantastic running back, is had to unfortunately step away from the game to deal with health issues too. And it doesn't feel to me like Penn State fans are, and not to say the guys that come in for them are not putting up numbers, because they are, but there seems to be and it's confusing me quite honestly, a level of indifference toward the idea of losing your starting quarterback and your starting running back. And
because they're 5-2, right? Because they have won and they've lost 2 games against teams that were higher ranked or that were perceived to be better than them. So, they're not at the level that Penn State is of they have to win those games or else you're a failure. Like, they're still in year 2 of this rebuilding process. So, at least from the perception perspective, I think that's a very fair thing of like, you've lost your starting quarterback and running back, but you're still producing. So therefore, everyone wants to believe next man up is literally like a factory and assembly of players. Wisconsin is not, and Penn State to a degree is not a plug and play organization where you have 5-star freshmen that walk on the field and are superstars from the minute they are out there. Even teams like Alabama have struggled in the past where they have to play players from an injury perspective. It's just we don't follow those details, on a day-to-day basis as Penn State people. Right. This offense is weird though. So it wants to be an air raid. And they started out last season by doing everything possible to put their players in position to fail. So they last season, they passed the ball nearly 60% of the time. So 57% of their plays last year were passing plays with an offense that had no receivers, to do that, to run 10 personnel, 4 receivers, 3 receivers, and 11. And then, an offensive line that was a Wisconsin hand in the dirt, run first, play action, protect them in pass protection sort of offensive line. Suddenly your tackles are in 2-point stances all the time. These are things that to me, I was like, okay, coming in this year, this isn't going to work. They're not a team that I am taking seriously, but they've adapted. Now they run the ball more than they pass by a healthy margin. They run the ball 54% of the time. That even considers with Tyler Van Dyke in the game. So they are, I think, in a situation where they're putting the strength of their offense, the offensive line in position to succeed. The left side is very good. Like I would say that is I don't know. There's elements of this team that I look at them and the left guard, the left tackle are very good. And they are maybe the best combo duo that we've seen from Penn State face this year. And I keep throwing that superlative out, but I think it's, you can make the argument that left to right, this is with West Virginia, one of the better offensive lines that they'll see this year. So they protect the quarterback pretty well, but the scheme also protects the quarterback pretty well. But that's the weird part is I feel like they're still aggressive enough with Braden Locke in there. It's just done in a weird way that I haven't 100% figured out, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, no question about it. I think this is a fair point from, I got to assume you're a Wisconsin fan, but Wisconsin has been much better running with Walker, who, of course, replaced Ches Malusi. I don't think there was any doubt Malusi was not right for a lot of the time he was still on the field. So that's helped for sure. I don't know if I meant to put that one up, but that's okay. We're just clicking buttons at this point.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I just think that I look at it and I do see, the question, if the number one thing I've heard and read this week from Penn State fans is concern about the trap game element of this trip to Madison, Wisconsin, T. Frank. Number two is this. I think this is probably the best one we got from Rob. BG dinked and dunked. They needed 4 yards. They got 5. They needed 6 yards. They got 7. And I don't have the stats from that game in front of me at this very second, but here's what I can tell you. Wisconsin, and this is the stats for the quarterback that's playing now, Braden Locke.
Mm-hmm.
His depth in terms of passing depth, he has as nearly as many completions from 0 to 9 yards as he does attempts at any other depth of the field. He's 34 of 51 on passes of 0 to 9 yards. He's 23 of 36 of 10 to 19 yards and 6 of 5 on 20-plus yards. The other thing is he is not mobile, from what I've been able to gather. So
no, he is.
But do you have concerns that there could be a similar plan of attack? Well, and it's one that we've seen before, right? Get the ball out quick. Don't let this pass rush get to you. The only concern I have if Wisconsin does want to go that direction is that it doesn't have a Harold Fannin Jr. that I have seen. It does not have a guy that can get in space like the USC running back did, whose name is escaping me at the moment, and really hurt you. Yes, Woody Marks, yes. And I think that is the challenge Wisconsin's going to have trying to do similar things to what other opponents have found ways to work against Penn State's defense.
That's, to me, it's does the system work against Penn State? And that comes down to run defense a little bit in terms of, I don't think Penn State is going to give up chunk plays as frequently. Like, I don't think there's a danger of Wisconsin running all over the Penn State defense. But if they don't get some stops early in drives, and part of the conversation, everyone's talking about Tom Allen's defense and his inability to game plan at the beginning of the game. What I've noticed generally, and this is kind of a microcosm that was in the USC game and in the UCLA game, is they want to dominate and control the line of scrimmage with just 4 as their base plan of attack. And then in the second half, once they get a beat on what the opponent is doing that week, they start to attack more. And they do start to, ramp that up during the second quarter. That is kind of the plan. It seems like early in games, they'll give up 3 yards on a run, which isn't a whole lot. But then if you give up 4 yards on a pass play, which isn't a whole lot, it's still 3rd and short. And then your advantage as a defense, Penn State's ace, is getting after teams on 3rd and long. They start forcing more of those plays as the game goes on, which is also a natural thing to do as you figure out what's going on. That's been the biggest thing, is Penn State has not been as aggressive early in games, and they haven't gotten those 3 and outs the way Manny Diaz did, because his whole defense was about applying pressure and getting after the run game and stopping the run and putting teams in these 3rd and long situations. It's just a little bit more standard. It's a little bit more traditional from Tom Allen. So you're getting some of these results early in games. And to me, it comes back to putting them in 3rd and long. They don't have an answer in 3rd and long. So can you get a stop on a pass play on 1st down, and suddenly it's 2nd and 10, and now you've done that. That to me is the game plan for Penn State, and it's one that they have achieved multiple times in this season. The last thing that I want to put out here, Greg, is that Braden Locke, this is one of those things I found. I don't think this is a 100% accurate stat, but I charted at least 5 times he had to scramble and threw the ball. He fumbled once and threw an interception on the other. If you move him off the spot, you said it earlier, it's not just that he's not good at creating, he is downright bad. The first play I watched him do, his eyes didn't know where to go. He didn't have an understanding, that kind of mature understanding of how to play out of structure. This entire offense is about structure, getting the ball out on time. He has one of the lowest average times to throw in the Big Ten. Despite that, they're still pushing the ball down the field, but they use RPO, screens, play action, all of these things to structure the offense around their young quarterback so he doesn't have to do a lot. But if you take away that first read, it's over. And I think Penn State can do that, and I think they can stop the run. To me, it's just about that offensive line challenging Penn State in the run game. I think they can battle there, but Penn State overall has the advantage from depth and attrition throughout a full game.
Final minutes here of the BWI Live Show on Wednesday, October 23rd. T. Frank, just final thoughts as we get ready for this game. Yeah, he can be a turnover machine, too. I did notice that. You obviously have just brought that up as well, but it's a good point. Just final thoughts. Don't forget, we will have the recruiting show and more game preview talk with Ryan Snyder and Sean Fitz here on the YouTube channel on Thursday or wherever you get your podcast. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. But, T. Frank, just your final thoughts as we wrap up another edition. Is it the final? No, not the final edition of October for us, but close, the second to last, and get ready for Wisconsin week.
This game, I think, is super interesting, and it's a good precursor to the Ohio State game because of some of the things we just talked about with Wisconsin and what they do and how they do it. I'm not saying it's a schematic comparison, but challenge what we've seen, the growth of the quarterback and the passing game. They can do that. Challenge the defensive line with a good offensive line that can create blocks and advantages for their offensive run game. Ohio State can do that. They're going to have, a running game with a quarterback and 2 running backs, and that's going to be a dangerous thing. So there are some tests and some landmarks in this game that I think are important for Penn State to pass, and to pass the right way, if that makes sense, of you were able to be efficient and do those things. That should give you kind of like the USC game where they were able to lock down those receivers for the most part and play really good man coverage. That was, to me, gave me more faith that they could challenge Ohio State's receivers. So now it's about these other elements of the game, these other elements of the offense and the defense. They'll be challenged in this game. I think they can pass those tests, but do they pass those tests in the way that you feel confident about? And Penn State fans haven't felt yet this year of decisively winning a game and putting a team away that is good. This is a good team. Put them away. Don't give them the opportunity to be in the game. As Badger and Bournemouth fan says, they can hang around. Yeah, everyone's hung around with Penn State this year. This game, put them away and build that, as everyone wants to say, build that confidence going into the Ohio State game.
Yeah, I think that Penn State certainly can do that and will do that. And like I said, we'll have predictions and much more on Penn State, Wisconsin over at BlueWhiteIllustrated.com. That was Thomas Frankar. I'm Greg Pickel. Thank you again to our show sponsor here on the Wednesday BWI Live Show, Rothrock Wood Project. You can visit them at rothrockwoodproject.com. T. Frank will be back tomorrow here on YouTube. Remember, you get your podcast audio, and I'll talk to you next from Madison, Wisconsin, as Penn State gets ready for the Badgers. Stay with us at BlueWhiteIllustrated.com for the latest on Nittany Lions and the latest on Penn State, Wisconsin.